Welcome to Movie Time in 5. My name is Brian Hayes, and each week I'll give you a nearly 5-minute spoiler-free look at a movie recently released in theaters, on iTunes, or one of your favorite streaming services such as Netflix or Amazon Prime. This week's episode, we're going to take a look at a 2015 horror anthology called Southbound. This movie is from some talented filmmakers, David Bruckner and Radio Silence, that brought us the excellent horror flick VHS. To say the least, is one of my favorite movies over the last 10 to 15 years. Really like that horror anthology. So let's dive into the details of Southbound. This horror anthology has 5 distinct stories, of which are all intertwined, given they are all along a southwestern desert highway, and characters are used to interlink and pass the baton on to the next story, outside of the first and last, which are directly linked together. The first story, called Way Out, deals with 2 bloodied men who are on the run from dark, deadly figures. The remaining 4 stories deal in everything from a female rock band to an adventure in an abandoned hospital, with the final story actually called Way In, which ties directly back to the first story, which explains the quote-unquote reason for judgment that is being carried out. If each segment was seen as a separate film, you'd be hard-pressed, though, to not just shrug at most of the stories as ho-hum plots and outcomes. Generic horror conventions are trotted out ad nauseum. There's examples of spatial loops, kid ghost, and flat tires along an old country road, with one story in particular standing out called The Accident, that takes place in an abandoned hospital and was the one story with, in my opinion, had a very creative and fresh plot twist and ending. So what does this movie do well? Well, the soundtrack and thematic overture during tense parts of the movie are executed exceptionally well. Some of the visuals and death sequences are wicked cool, such as one involving a Death Reaper in the first story, who takes and it was interesting because there's actually an animated GIF that I've seen out on Twitter, which is one of the reasons that I went out to watch this movie. It drove me to watch it. Segments such as The Accident and the linkage between the first and last story are solid, along with some of the magically delicious death scenes, like I mentioned a second ago, such as you saw from the Death Reapers. What does the movie struggle with? Well, there are a couple things that stand out. Well, none of the segments, in my opinion, outside of the hospital, which I would give a solid B+ to an A-, none of them stand out. I would say C-grade material, with some commonly used tropes again, such as one being clean living religious folks who turn out to be something they say they're not. The Accident does have some grisly moments, very well done. Granted, it has the entertainment factor of watching someone perform surgery, so it gets pretty rough. But the other stories have some very so-so CGI and makeup. Some of the creatures in, I believe it's the second to last segment, look like tubby naked guys rolled in flour. Just not very well executed visuals in some parts of this movie. And again, the Death Reapers, though, are rad. Those are really cool and well executed, and I really like the visuals of those. But again, most of the movie is so-so in regards to into the visuals. So, in conclusion, what would I give Southbound in regards to a grade? I would give it a 6.5 out of 10. And although I don't think it is as strong as some horror anthologies like Trick or Treat, VHS, or the Christmas Horror Story, I still think it is worth dropping $3 or $4 on iTunes to rent it. I'm sure it's probably available on Amazon right now, but I don't believe it's available yet on Netflix or Amazon Prime. But again, I think a rent, it is strong enough, especially the hospital sequence and some of the visuals you'll see in the first segment and the last segment. I think it's strong enough to drop a little bit of cash to see this movie. So I hope you've enjoyed this Movie Time in 5. You can find me on Twitter at BrianHayes73. And until next week, do your heart some good and get scared.